It became quite clear to me that while he was, leading the Senate, the bill was never going to pass. So it was like, okay, we just have to get rid of him.
A stalled bill to require better insurance coverage for breast cancer screenings led to a campaign that helped oust North Carolina's most powerful politician. From Hillsborough to Hildebrand, you're listening to the WUNC Politics Podcast. I'm Colin Campbell, Capitol Bureau Chief at WUNC News. Senate Leader Phil Berger lost his primary in March to Rockingham County Sheriff Sam Page by just 23 votes. And when the margin is that close, every factor that influenced at least 23 voters could be considered one of the deciding elements in the race. Some folks have tied Berger's loss to opposition in Rockingham County to a proposed casino that the senator supported. But it's not the only aspect of Berger's legislative record that came under criticism during the primary. Viewers of Triad TV stations likely saw this ad from the Piedmont Accountability Coalition back during the campaign.
Fighting cancer taught me a disturbing truth. Insurance companies often deny coverage for cancer screenings because politicians like Phil Berger protect them.
The speaker in that ad is Sheila Mikhail, who also provided the majority of the money raised by the group for its campaign. She's founded and led several biotechnology companies in North Carolina, including Ask Bio and M34, which develops gene therapies to treat neurological diseases. She's also founded the nonprofit Breast Cancer Ruckus to advocate for better breast cancer screenings. And she joins me now to talk about the advocacy work and how it got her involved in the state's most watched Senate primary. Thanks so much for speaking with me.
Thank you, Colin, for inviting me.
So let's start off with how you got involved with this particular issue. When did you learn that North Carolina doesn't require insurance coverage for supplemental breast cancer screenings, and that's something that maybe needs legislative attention?
Unfortunately, it was through my own diagnosis. So in 2022, I was getting out of the shower and I noticed a small dimple on my left breast. And my first thought was, it's just cellulite. I had just turned 56 years of age. But at the request of my daughter, I went in and I had a diagnostic mammogram done. And, it was very difficult to see anything because apparently because I had this dense tissue. But they thought I had breast cancer on the left-hand side, and they took a biopsy. It came back showing that it was slow growing, and I knew that was a problem because I had a screening mammogram, 3D, just a few months earlier, which was all clear, no indication of cancer. So I went back and asked the oncologist for some kind of supplemental screening. Now, I didn't know what in the world that meant. I didn't know if it was an X-ray, MRI, PET, CT. While I develop drugs, I don't do anything with imaging. But eventually, I was told to get a breast MRI. To access that, though, I was told I would have to pay $1,300. Well, luckily, I could whip out my visa and get access to that test, and thank God for that, because that test demonstrated that I had a very large tumor, almost 3 centimeters, that went totally undetected by the 3D mammograms, including the diagnostic. And at that point in time, I started investigating the reliability of mammograms, including, the 3D breast digital tomosynthesis, and started learning that they're really not reliable. For those of us with dense tissue, which is up to 50% of women, they miss 1 out of 2 tumors. Can you imagine getting on a plane if you knew TSA missed 1 out of 2 bombs? And so I've been, since that time, really on a crusade to educate women, really trying to tell them to be more knowledgeable about the need for supplemental screening. I have this seminar called Don't Be Dense, about dense breasts, and also taking away the hurdle for women to get access to these tests. That is to expand insurance coverage for the supplemental screening.
And looking back on the experience that you had, do you feel like if you hadn't had the means to pay for that additional $1,300 screening, would your cancer have gone undetected until you were much more sick than when you actually were able to get treatment?
Yes, I do believe that. I had 2 stage 2 diagnoses. I wish somebody would have told me I needed the supplemental screening. I had detected my cancer years earlier. Apparently, my cancer was growing for 7 years before the breast MRI detected it. And later stage diagnosis, as you know, is much more problematic. If you have an early stage diagnosis, it's almost 100% curable. If you get a stage 4 diagnosis, there's a 75% chance you won't be here in 5 years. So early detection is really key.
And with the dense breast issues, apologies if this comes off as an ignorant or question coming from a man, but how does a woman know if she's in that category and ought to be asking for this extra screening?
So if you have dense breast, that means that you have more fibrotic tissue, which also means when you do your own self-examination, it's hard to depict any, solid masses because your breasts feel like a bag of marbles. That's what mine always felt like. So self-diagnosis, by physical exam is very difficult. Women know if they have dense tissue or not because the FDA requires nationwide, starting in September of last year, that their mammogram tell them if they have dense tissue or not. Now, the problem with that notice is it basically says you have dense tissue, go talk to your doctor and see if you need any additional testing. Many women, like myself, and I was, going to Duke, not a secondary, hospital. I talked to my physician, and she said not to worry about it. Most women have dense tissue, and I only had a little bit dense because I had heterogeneously rather than extremely dense. There's 2 categories of dense, heterogeneously being about 40% of women and extremely dense being about 10% more problematic, more dense, as it sounds. And that, unfortunately, was misinformation. If you have dense tissue, what that means is a mammogram, your breast tissue shows up as white. And unfortunately, cancer also shows up as white. So it's like looking at a snowball in a snowstorm when radiologists are trying to find the cancer. They just can't see it. And so that's why it's important to have the additional screening, either an ultrasound or a breast MRI.
Yeah, so a lot of women, I think, are under the misimpression that if they go get that mammogram as they're supposed to and it comes back clear, then they're in the clear, they don't have to worry, and that's really not the case for a large percentage of people.
Yeah, I think that's one big misconception. I know myself every year when I went and I got the clean mammogram report, it was like, shoo, check, that's done for the year. Now, I never anticipated I would get breast cancer, and this is another big misunderstanding that a lot of physicians and women have. The biggest risk factor for getting breast cancer is just being a woman. I had eaten right, I was thin, I exercised, I had no family history. And my doctors always, when, assessing my risk, said, well, you have no family history and you do all the right things, so don't worry too much about it. But in actuality, having dense tissue means you're at higher risk. In fact, if you have extremely dense tissue, you have the same risk profile for getting breast cancer as having a mother or a sister who had breast cancer. So that's very problematic, and you definitely need to get the supplemental screening.
And as far as the supplemental screenings go, there was legislation in both the House and Senate last year, and it did pass the House last year to require insurance coverage of supplemental screenings. As I understand, it was sort of on parity with a mammogram, so you wouldn't have to pay the same cost, in your case, I guess, $1,300 to get the supplemental screening. Is that sort of the goal with making some legislative changes here?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The goal is twofold. One, to make sure that, women don't have a financial barrier to get access to the necessary test to find their breast cancer timely, that is the supplemental screening, but also to change the standard of care here in North Carolina because, unfortunately, insurance coverage dictates what, women are given in terms of breast cancer testing. And so we need to change that, too, by making sure insurance covers these additional tests.
And as the bill went through the House last year, were you involved with some of the advocacy work that got that across the finish line, at least in one chamber?
Yes, and in fact, it went through the House, but it never came out of the Senate Rules Committee, and that is a committee that Senator Phil Berger controlled. We also introduced another piece of legislation, Senate Bill 553, so we introduced legislation on both sides trying to break through that barrier.
And I know that on the Senate side, Senate Minority Leader Sidney Batch, who's also a cancer survivor, was the sponsor of that bill. I know she doesn't necessarily get along super well with Senate Leader Berger, as you might expect. I almost wonder whether her making that a legislative priority for her own agenda was almost something where Republicans may have wanted to stop the bill from moving forward as a result of seeing her name on it.
Yeah, it could be, and that's really petty. We elect our officials to look out for our interests, not to play these petty games. And last time I checked, I don't think just because you vote Republican means you're not going to get breast cancer.
Did you talk to any of the senators on that side, and what sort of reaction did you get when you tried to sort of make the case to folks on the Senate side that this bill was worthy of consideration and passage?
I got a complete blanket statement that they will not impose any mandates on insurance companies. I develop drugs, and as a drug development company, I've got a whole bunch of mandates on me dealing with the FDA. But for some reason, insurance companies are very special and protected by our state Senate.
Is this something you've, in your professional work, dealt with before with the insurance companies trying to block? If your company's come up with a great new treatment, and then the next hurdle is, well, got to convince insurance companies to cover it, or otherwise the patients that really need it are never going to actually get access to what you've developed.
Yeah, reimbursement is definitely key. But if you just step back, our country, we pay the most for health care, and we have some of the worst outcomes. And I would argue that, insurance companies, including, PBMs, which take 50 cents of every dollar out of the system and provide no value, are a big reason for that.
And the opposing argument that I've heard in this debate over the screening bill is that these kind of mandates for insurance companies and what they have to cover could potentially drive up the premiums and the overall cost. Do you buy that argument at all?
That's complete BS. And the reason for that is studies have been done. So Medicaid in our state covers the supplemental screening because they've determined that it's much cheaper to pay a few $100s to give women access to an ultrasound or a breast MRI and find their cancer early when it is cheaper and easier to treat. There's a big jump in treatment costs between a stage 2 and stage 3 diagnosis. It's over $100,000 based on the Medicaid study that justified covering it under the Medicaid plan. Brad Briner, who is the state treasurer, he also looked at the economics, and now the state employees' health care plan covers it. So it's just, people on private insurance, we pay the most and we get the least with regards to this. One more point, a lot of red states in the South cover it. So now Florida, Texas, Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Louisiana, they've all determined that it is cost effective to cover the supplemental screening. So, again, I don't buy that argument. I think, we've got groups like Blue Cross Blue Shield, who I've spoken to, who are very much against this. I think that they see that, people change insurance plans so frequently that they're just hoping they can kick the can down the road. The problem is more of us are getting breast cancer at younger ages. So we're not going to age out of private insurance and get on Medicare. We'll die first. We need treatment timely. And the later stage of diagnosis, not only is, a woman's life more in jeopardy, every day there's 130 women who die of breast cancer despite all of the improvements in medical treatment. That's equivalent to a middle-sized jet crashing every single day. So it's still a life and death situation. But in addition, a later stage diagnosis means much harsher treatment for a woman, double mastectomies, multiple rounds of radiation, chemotherapy. How is she supposed to take care of her family when she is subject to such harsh treatment? If we find it earlier, the treatment is much quicker, much faster and easier, and a woman can get back on her feet and go back to work and take care of her family. In fact, there's a study, I think it was done by RTI, that says if a woman gets diagnosed after stage 2, she doesn't return to work. And that's one more point I want to bring up. The financial burden. Okay, so the insurance companies don't want that financial burden. But right now, the out-of-pocket costs associated with being a breast cancer patient versus any other type of cancer is much, much higher. there's over $3 billion per year that women have to bear because of their diagnosis. So, the costs are there with the later stage diagnosis. It's just the insurance companies are putting it on, the people.
One thing that sort of brings up to mind for me, particularly since you're a business leader, if insurance coverage in North Carolina, because the insurance companies are calling the shots on what they cover, ends up being less effective than what you see in other states, at a certain point, does this become an economic development issue for North Carolina that a CEO such as yourself, who's looking at, which state do I put my company in, which state do I put my employees in, they may see that as negative towards North Carolina because you're going to have better health care for your employees if you go to a different state?
Absolutely. So in the life sciences industry, and again, North Carolina boasts, and is actually one of the best places for life sciences in the country. The workforce is comprised of 53% women. So this is an economic issue. And I have spoken to large pharma companies and large pharma companies, UCB, Synthios, and Lilly have indicated that they are supportive of the passage of a bill that would expand supplemental insurance coverage in North Carolina. So business leaders recognize the value of this. Myself, I built Ask Bio here in Research Triangle Park. It was difficult because funding is not as readily available as it is in other places like Boston and Silicon Valley. But I was very committed to the area, and despite the hardship, was eventually successful. It took me 14 years to raise my first round of funding, and the company did well, and we have created hundreds of jobs, high-paying jobs here in North Carolina. I think if I had known that my life would have been much worse, right, on a key factor, healthcare. I think I would have taken the offers to move to another location. And I have to say, for women entrepreneurs who are looking at places to situate their companies, in North Carolina, when it comes to such a key factor that impacts the quality of your life, it's dismissed so readily. It really gives a message that we're a second-class citizen here.
I want to sort of jump into sort of how your passion around this issue and your frustration with what happened in the legislature last year got you involved in a interesting primary race. What made you decide to go beyond what you typically see as normal forms of policy advocacy and get involved financially in this primary race with Senate Leader Phil Berger?
There were a lot of reasons that I did not support Phil Berger. The gerrymandering, being 42nd in the country in terms of teacher pay, the fact he did not get a budget completed last year. But I never said anything. Those were not the issues that got me off the sideline. It was fundamentally the fact that he would not move on this issue of, expanding insurance coverage for supplemental screening. And it became quite clear to me that while he was, leading the Senate, the bill was never going to pass. So it was like, okay, we just have to get rid of him. And I met with Sam Page, and I didn't think I was going to have anything in common with him, but quite the contrary. He's very thoughtful. He was his family has had some dealings with breast cancer. He saw the detrimental impact on a young family. And Sam was very educated about a lot of things, the power of insurance companies, the role, unnecessary role of PBMs. And we had a lot in common. So it was, and he's a very likable, high-integrity individual. And I found it very easy, right, to relate to him and to get on consensus on many issues. And so from there, it was like, okay, what do we need to do? And, in money, unfortunately. I don't think, though, money was the key. I think Phil Berger lost the race because of his actions, the casino, right, being out of step with his own constituency. But that being said, I know I had at least 23 votes in favor of Sam Page. I have a list of names, and I know I contributed at least 23 votes. And, I think people get so cynical about democracy and you can't do anything about it. And I know I tried getting the Democrats, I tried getting independents to come. Everybody was scared. Nobody wanted to go against Phil Berger because of the threat of retribution. And for me, it was like, I faced cancer. I faced a death sentence. Phil Berger doesn't scare me. And my own conscience, if I didn't speak out, right, and help other women, I mean, I truly believe that I was given so much in this life. I have such a blessed life that if I don't give back when I'm called upon, right, to make change, if I stand on the sidelines and just let bad things happen to other people, then there'll be a price to pay someday. And so I felt like a moral obligation to step up, put my money behind it. And, I work hard for that money and put my name behind it. And I'll tell you, Blue Cross Blue Shield stood behind this organization, Coalition for Affordable Health Care in NC, this BS thing that they attacked me, saying it was dark money. There was no dark money about it. My name was there, my face was there, and I called Phil Berger out personally. I'm not a coward. And so I did get really offended by that. I know politics is dirty, but, you can call me a liar, but the data's there. There are big studies that have been done, like the BRAID study more recently, that demonstrates clearly that women need this extra screening. And it's just because insurance companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield have so much power in the state that women don't have it. So, yeah, that's why I did it. It's wrong. What's going on is wrong.
As we know, you appeared in the ad yourself. What kind of reaction did you get from that? You mentioned the possibility there was some backlash, and I'm curious why you went that route versus a lot of political ads. You have that unseen narrator that makes the case as opposed to the person who's funding the ad directly putting their face out there.
Because I believe in this cause. And, if you believe in something, you put your name on it. You don't back away. You don't hide in the shadows. What kind of person does that? If you have an issue and you think that somebody's not behaving appropriately, you stand up and you approach the individual face to face. And, that's what I believe I did. I didn't need to hide in the shadows.
Yeah. Who else was involved with the campaign effort? Was it mostly you leading it yourself, or did you have other folks who were stepping in either publicly or behind the scenes to help you out?
No, I mean, like I said, I tried to get a lot of people to step up, and I could not because of fear of retribution. So my business partner, who has been with me in multiple companies, and we've gone through the hardship of raising money on Wall Street and the hardship of, being told no by pharmaceutical companies when we try to do collaborations. We've gone through a lot together, so he put some money to match my money. And there may be of some other people that I don't know who they are who may have gotten involved, but literally, the bulk of the money was mine and the commitment was mine. I'll take all responsibility for it.
All right. Well, do you think the opposition here to this bill has mostly just been driven by Blue Cross Blue Shield's campaign contributions? Is that sort of the deciding factor in stopping these kind of bills?
Yeah, but I have to say it's a bigger issue, right? I think, unfortunately, the more I investigate this, the more it's so clear that our democracy is on sale. I can get in front of literally any politician for a campaign contribution. Depends if it's at the national level or the state level. There's a whole incestuous system of paying for votes and to be heard and lobbyists. It's really sad to think, I have, my grandfather fought in World War II, and to think that the sacrifices that so many veterans have made, and this is where we're at. It's a pay-to-go system. I really wish it would change. Maybe I'm a little bit of an idealist. Fundamentally, I believe in this country. It allowed somebody like me, who my mom was a beautician, my dad was a construction worker, and, I had the ability to get a great public school education, got great graduate school education, and then could start these companies, right, and become a success story. America fundamentally is just an incredible place, full of great promise, but it's now become really very corrupt. And, I think Blue Cross Blue Shield exercising their economic power is just one example, right? I think there's many more examples that are out there.
Does this ultimately go kind of beyond this one issue of coverage for cancer screenings, and that we I mean, I've seen studies that show North Carolina has some of the highest healthcare costs in the country. And as I hear different proposed reforms go through the legislative building, there's always some healthcare constituency group with a lot of lobbyists, a lot of financial backing that can kind of stop that from going ahead. I mean, are we sort of at a stalemate in the state where the different competing factors in the world of healthcare are sort of stopping each other from stopping the state from moving ahead and getting a handle on costs?
I think we are. I mean, the hospitals, you look at this breast cancer screening, this is I saw an estimate of $8 billion business a year. The hospitals make money, the radiologists make money, the imaging, the companies that provide the devices, they make money. Everybody's making money on this, and nobody wants anything to change anytime soon. The only people that get sacrificed, are the patients, and we have no voice. It's really wrong, and, we're paying too much for health care. It's a lot cheaper to put more investment in preventive measures, early diagnosis with, proper screening. It's common sense. And, right now, 39 other states have figured that out. So it's not like a big mystery, but North Carolina seems hell-bent determined to be the very last one to make any change on this issue.
Are you seeing any signs of movement as we get into the short session? I wonder if people saw your ads and maybe they weren't even in Phil Berger's district, but that incentivized them to want to call their senator in wherever part of the state they were and try to join the advocacy for getting this bill across. And any chance that sort of moves the needle in the short term?
I think it's going to be a very low likelihood. I think Phil Berger, I've already had a little bit of the retribution. I've had to get off certain boards that I was appointed to, economic boards where I was, providing some expertise and entrepreneurship and building biotech companies. Again, it doesn't hurt me any. It was service. I was providing service. But people are scared about retribution from Phil Berger and his cronies, so I had to get off those. So I just, I think we just have to wait until all this passes. And in the meanwhile, I'm just going to go out and just, my messaging as much as possible. I paid personally for brochures to be created about the need for supplemental screening, and we distributed them to 750 imaging centers across the state. We have formed an organization called Women's Health Advocates, and we are going to push for policy change on this issue. And our first meeting will be on May 5th, Cinco de Mayo. We're going to provide some free lunch, and if people are interested in learning more, go to WHANC.org. Again, WHANC.org, so it's Women's Health Advocates of North Carolina.org. Women, we've been too easily dismissed. Most of my life I've been told, just sort of suck it up, right? And when I started out of school in the 1980s, it was like a scene from Mad Men, a lot of sexual harassment. And I was told it was my responsibility not to put myself in a compromising position. I had my daughter on a Thursday, and I was told if I wasn't back to work by Monday, right, this was before the Family Medical Leave Act was enacted, that I would lose my job. Only 3% of venture-backed companies are run by women, so I was told I had to be extra special, right, in order to get any kind of backing from Wall Street. And then, my pay was always less than my male counterparts. And I was told, well, just be happy that you have a place at the table. I sucked it up. And I think many women in my generation have done similarly. But when it comes to your life and your health and my daughter's life and her health, I think that's where, we stop being good girls and we start speaking up, and we don't stay in line anymore because I think we've crossed the line where, as a gender, we can only do so much. And at this point, I think it's time to make change and to let people know that we are the majority of citizens, right? Women are the majority of citizens in the state, and it's time that we unite and flex our muscle a little. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm not a rebellious type person. I just think that we have to be more than an afterthought, and the men aren't looking out for our interests. So we need to remind them that we're a very, influential part of the citizens of the state.
Well, looking ahead, after your involvement in the Berger primary and all that came with that, do you anticipate getting involved at this kind of level in political campaigns in the future, either around this issue or something else?
Absolutely. So through Women's Health Advocates, I think we need to, as a coalition of women, look at different issues like this breast cancer screening issue, but also maternal mortality. We have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the country. Why is that? Totally preventable. We need to look out for each other. In this new era, it's everybody's taking care of themselves, and as long as they're okay, then that's fine. I don't want to live in a community like that. I wasn't raised like that. We all do better, right? Looking out for each other and making sure that there's just a basic level of decency in this country. It's not every person out for themselves. We are a society, and that means that there's certain interrelationships and certain responsibilities to each other.
Sheila Mikhail is the founder of several biotechnology companies in North Carolina and the founder of a nonprofit advocating for better breast cancer screenings here in the state. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you, Colin. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And that's it for this week's episode. If you have any feedback on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Raleigh Reporter, or you can contact me through our website, WUNC.org. I'm Colin Campbell. Thanks for listening.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious, because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.